Hi, my name is Vanessa Nan, and I will be presenting about the novel No Place to Hide, written by Glenn Greenwald, and it is about Edward Snowden and the process in which he leaked the files from the NSA to the general public of the United States of America. So to begin the book, Greenwald introduced the novel by setting up who Edward Snowden was and like what kind of person he was and what his responsibility was in the process of the leaking of the documents from the NSA. Um, and the NSA stands for the National Security Agency, so it's an agency that is implemented by the United States of America. And basically, what they were doing is they were abusing their power of the information that they were withholding from citizens of the United States of America. And so they were eavesdropping, using electronic documents or using electronic things from the United States, like citizens, and also like reading emails and infiltrating data through that way. And so Snowden and Greenwald felt that the government should be accountable for their actions and forced to pay the price of the things that they were doing. Um, it was also a violation of the Fourth Amendment because the Fourth Amendment states that the rights of the people is to be secure in their person, their house, and the papers, and they're also exempt from unreasonable search and seizure. But that was being violated because the NSA was, without probable cause, searching through citizens' emails and phone calls and text messages and things of that nature. Um, they never used warrants either, which was another a violation of the Fourth Amendment. So the main issue that there was no accountability and there was no checks and balances of what was happening, and there was a fear of terrorism, which is like why they started what they were doing. However, they totally overstepped their boundaries. In the first chapter, it's called Contact, and so basically, on December 1st, 2012, that was the first time that Snowden had reached out to Greenwald. And Glenn Greenwald, who's the author of the book, he worked for a paper called The Guardian, which is based in London. And it was a paper that he wrote very controversial articles about. And he had such a high position, so nobody could edit or review his articles before they ran in the paper, which made him a very important part of the operation because he had power to leak these documents without other people trying to edit them in any sort of way. And so Snowden used the nickname of Cincinnatus, which is in history, he was a farmer who was appointed to be the dictator of Rome, so it was a symbol of political power, which is very interesting in the way that he decided to reach out to Greenwald. Um, and he said that he was trying to win over his support and assistance in the process, and Greenwald never felt inclined to extend any information to Snowden, and so it took months and months to where Greenwald would never respond to Snowden, and then suddenly Snowden said that he had these certain documents, and Greenwald needed to download encrypting data so he could read them, and then thus help him with his operation. And he kept blowing it off, and then finally Laura Poitras is one of Greenwald's friends, and she was a documentary filmmaker, and said that Snowden had reached out to her, and so then Greenwald knew this was serious. And so on May 20th, Laura contacted Greenwald saying that they had to go to Hong Kong to meet the source of this project, and they still didn't know who Snowden was. They just knew that it was this person who had information. And Greenwald then agreed to go to Hong Kong and was given information about their first story, which had to do with PRISM, which is an operation through NSA, and it allowed the NSA to collect private communications from companies such as Facebook and Google and Skype. And Greenwald then agreed, so Snowden sent him the documents so that he could review them, so he knew what was being leaked. And one of the first documents that was being leaked was an order from FISA, which is the Forever Intelligence Surveillance Act, which forced Verizon, the company of Verizon, the telephone company, to turn over all the call records and nobody knew this was happening. So that was a big issue because FISA went behind the public's back and it was collecting all their phone data. It was revealed that in Section 215 of the Patriot Act, which was implemented after 9/11, it was changed so that the government only needed probable cause they used to only need probable cause, but now they only needed relevance towards the topic in order to search like phone calls and things like that. So it revealed how Congress basically lied to the public about the NSA's doing. In the second chapter, it is called 10 Days in Hong Kong, and it's about when Greenwald and Laura went to Hong Kong, and they arrived in Hong Kong on Saturday, June 2nd, and they checked into their hotel. And Snowden was also staying at the hotel, and they were very surprised to learn about that because it's like he's under so much scrutiny. He's going to be in the future, and staying in a hotel was so open and like available, and people could just come and see him at any time, and he was like not under the public eye. So Greenwald and Laura were given specific instructions, and Snowden had everything planned out to a T, which was very interesting to see like in the book. And they had very specific instructions that they were supposed to meet with him at 10 in a certain meeting room, and he would be carrying a Rubik's Cube. And if he didn't come up within 2 minutes of 10 o'clock, then they were to leave and come back at 10:15 or 10:20. And he didn't show up at 10, so they had to leave and come back at 10:20. And Snowden showed up exactly at 10:22, and it was the first time that Laura and Greenwald were to see Snowden and see who this man was behind all of these emails. And they were very surprised to discover that he was so young. He was only age 29 at the time that this happened, and he was dressed in jeans and a t-shirt, which is not how either of them had pictured him. And Snowden was very paranoid about everything, and he was worried about security, since he knew that the NSA, like, he knew all of their tricks, and they always made sure that they didn't have their phones on them, and everything was, like, put away and things like that. And Greenwald had two priorities when he first met Snowden. It was to find out everything he could as fast as possible, because they didn't know if Snowden would be arrested at any time once these documents were leaked, and also to find out what kind of person he was, because obviously if you don't know this person, he was trying to figure out if he was hiding things or just if he was very upfront. And so they ended up doing questioning for 5 hours. And they learned that Snowden never finished high school, even though he's still extremely intelligent and one of like the highest rankings in his job. And he was disturbed by the mentality because Snowden, after 9/11, became very patriotic, and he was from a military family, and so he enlisted into the army, but he was very disturbed and taken back by the American soldiers and how their mindset was to only kill Arabs, not to like free them, which is like what kind of the main goal was. And so that kind of shifted his mentality when he figured that out. And so he worked as a Microsoft certified systems engineer since 2002, and he had a natural talent for computers and technology. And so in 2005, he got a job as a technical expert for the CIA. And then in 2007, the CIA stationed him in Geneva for 3 years. And he began to learn about government secret jobs, and he was displeased by the corruption that was happening in the country. So the higher the power, the less accountability was like what he discovered in the government, which was like a theme throughout the whole book. And he felt an obligation to expose the secret to the American people because he felt that they were being deprived of their rights of knowing what was happening. So one of his famous quotes is that if you are not acting upon your beliefs, they're probably not real. So that's kind of one of the things that he kept with him throughout this whole process. And so Greenwald understood the generation gap and was able to realize how important technology was to the people of Snowden's like age group. And Snowden was persistent that he did not want the story to be about him. He wanted the story to be about the NSA, which is very interesting because he wasn't doing this for pride for himself. He was doing this because he wanted the American people to know what was happening. There was lots of debate about which source was going to break first, but then they ended up coming up with a sequence of order from FISA, which was collecting the phone calls from Verizon, the history of the Bush eavesdropping program, which was implemented for a while, and then the Boundless Informant program was going to be third, which is data tracking, and then finally the PRISM program. And there was lots of issues with The Guardian because it was such a dangerous story to leak that they weren't sure how it was going to happen. So Greenwald wanted to beat the Washington Post since he worked for The Guardian, but they were having lots of issues. So on Thursday, on 5:40 p.m., the story became live, and the NSA was already denying information, like this information that was already leaked within like such a short time of it being leaked, and it was creating a conversation, which was what Snowden wanted. So that was like the primary thing of what he wanted this to happen. And so on Thursday, it marked day 5 in Hong Kong, and Snowden received information that his girlfriend in Hawaii was being questioned about where Snowden was and all these things, which is like very concerning. And so on Saturday, the 4th article ran. And to finish, on Saturday, June 9th was when the last article ran, and The Guardian, which is the one that released the story, revealing all of the information, and also revealing Snowden as the source of the information that was being leaked. On chapter 3, it's called Collect It All, and so it talked about the main mindset of the NSA is to collect all of the data as possible, which is like very interesting. And so it discovered lots of PowerPoints and phone calls that like were actually revealed in the book, which were very interesting to watch because it was right from like NSA PowerPoints. And so, for example, the NSA in a 30-day span had collected more than 97 billion emails and 124 billion phone calls, which is absolutely absurd and so scary to think about. And the U.S. government had built a system that had a goal of completely eliminating electronic privacy, which is so scary to think about because we use technology every day so much, and it's such a big part of our lives in this day and age. It was very eye-opening, and there's information about Keith B. Alexander, who oversaw the NSA headquarters, and he's the most powerful intelligence chief in the U.S. history, and his strategy was just to get all of the data, and he didn't worry about the law, he just wanted to get the job done, which is a very like negative mentality, especially in this sense of power. And there were reports that there was far more data collected than there was ever useful, like for these analysts, which is also concerning. It was calculated that the NSA intercepted roughly 75% of all U.S. internet traffic, and most of the NSA, they relied on relationships with large companies. And then in 2013, there was also revealed that NATO was a part of this NSA program in infiltrating data, which is also scary to think about. It was also very interesting because the NSA was targeted multiple times and like being accused of doing things, and they would deny every single time, which is like just straight up lying to the American public, which is also like not comforting at all. And then there was a really interesting section about the use of metadata and the use of content, and content is like the process of actually listening to people's phone calls or reading their emails, but metadata is how they gathered all the information, and it's more detailed records, so it's who emailed who, where they were, the location of either person, like emailing or phone calling, how long the phone calls lasted, and everything like that. So that's when you can kind of piece together everything that's happening. In chapter 4, it's called The Harm of Surveillance, and there was a debate about privacy, and it's basically it talked all about privacy and how if you have something that you don't want on the internet, maybe you shouldn't be doing it in the first place. That was like the mindset that was Mark Zuckerberg, the creator of Facebook, had demonstrated. And so in our day and age, people have become too comfortable not only sharing information like with a lot more people, but like more information is being shared. And the U.S. government was being seen as very hypocritical because they actually used extreme measures to shield like their actions from the public. And so in our day and age, like your personal life is known as your Twitter page or your Facebook page. However, your boss's personal life is known as none of your business. So it's nothing that you should know about, which I thought was a very interesting point that was brought up. And it's mainly just all about power and how people higher up have more power yet less accountability. And privacy, it's known as something for people who have something to hide, which I thought was very interesting as well. But on the contrary, I don't think any of us would want to put a full list of our phone calls and phone records and who we called and when we called them every day. And privacy is the right of a human and a core condition of being free and a free person in the United States of America, which is supposed to be a free country. And privacy is less essential to human freedom and happiness, or it is essential to human freedom and happiness. That's a key fundamental concept of our country. And one idea that was brought up was the panopticon, which is when just like a fundamental idea. It's a physical building in a prison. It has windows on all around. We learned about it in class, but it's a really interesting concept because when you think that you're being watched, you're obviously going to act with more dignity and be much more guarded than if you were to be free and know that people were not watching you. So it's like this constant anxiety of people always watching you, and it's okay to have privacy, and it doesn't mean you're doing anything wrong. We all like want privacy, whether it be in our room or like in our text messages between somebody like personal. it was just very interesting. And there was also talked about in chapter 4 racial profiling against Muslims, and the NSA officers would mistake people for being terrorists because of like their skin or their racial profiling was happening. But the NSA officer told the operators that it's nothing to worry about, like just do it anyways, which I thought was very interesting. Um, and democracy requires accountability and consent of the people being governed, which I thought was a very interesting concept because that's not what was happening here. Like we were not knowing about our information, so the democracy could not function properly. In chapter 5, it was called the Fourth Estate, and basically on June 6th, there was leaked that there was a possibility of a criminal investigation by the New York Times against Greenwald and Snowden, and there was lots of negative things written about Greenwald, making him sound very unreliable and like his work was not credible. Um, and so there was lots of false accusations made, and positives from interviews of Snowden's colleagues were not released in articles that were being out in the public, and there was also leaked information about tax debt that Greenwald was in, which was very interesting that it came up right after these articles were leaked. And no American had ever been prosecuted for releasing classified information because Greenwald was now classified as a co-conspirator because under the Obama administration there was so much more strict policy, which I thought was very interesting. And then news broke that Snowden had left Hong Kong and fled to Moscow, and so he was looked at as a public enemy because he betrayed America, and his patriotism was being questioned since he fled to Russia, who's one of our enemies, and was seeking refuge in China, who's also not one of like our close allies, which I thought was very interesting. In reality, all Snowden was trying to do was do the American public a favor, and he saw no problem, and he was actually very willing to face the consequences, which is very bold of him. So basically, infiltrating government secrets was a sense of pride for him, and it's Greenwald also found it as not the wrong way of journalism. It encompasses the true meaning, which is taking risks, and he was really ended the book by talking about how journalism had fallen into the United States in present day and how it's really diminished in its meaning. And so a main thesis in the book that I found was that you really have to follow what you believe in, and if you believe in something strong enough, you know, do something about it and make a change in the world. And I really enjoyed overall the book. I thought it was really interesting, and the intensity and the storytelling was really nicely done. Greenwald is a great writer, and I thought that some of the technical details took away from the book. So overall, I would recommend it. Thank you.